There was a time when dinner didn't require a long list of ingredients or hours in the kitchen. In mid-century American homes, quick and affordable suppers were a way of life. Vintage cookbooks were filled with simple meals that busy families could prepare in minutes, often using pantry staples that were always on hand. Many of those clever little dinners slowly faded away as modern cooking trends took over. Yet they were practical, comforting, and surprisingly satisfying. Today, we're stepping back into that forgotten kitchen to rediscover 10 cheap vintage suppers that can still be made in about 10 minutes, and once fed families across America. In the early 1950s, quick suppers were more than a convenience. They were a necessity for busy households. One of the simplest meals found in vintage kitchen guides was a humble dish often called creamed tuna on toast. It was cheap, filling, and could be prepared in about 10 minutes, which made it a favorite for families trying to stretch their grocery budget. The idea behind this supper was wonderfully simple. A small saucepan went onto the stove, and butter melted gently at the bottom. A spoonful of flour was stirred in to form a smooth paste, the beginning of a creamy sauce. Then milk was slowly poured in while the mixture was whisked until it thickened into a rich, comforting gravy. Once the sauce reached the perfect texture, a can of tuna was folded in along with a pinch of salt and black pepper. While the sauce simmered for just a few minutes, slices of bread were toasted until golden brown. The creamy tuna mixture was then spooned generously over the toast, creating a warm and satisfying supper that required almost no effort. For many families, this meal appeared on the table during busy weeknights when time and money were both limited. It was simple, dependable, and filling enough to feed several people without costing much. Some households even added peas or a sprinkle of paprika for extra flavor, showing how adaptable the recipe could be. Over time, dishes like this slowly disappeared as convenience foods and takeout meals became more common. Yet the charm of this old supper remains in its practicality. It proves that with only a few ingredients and a little creativity, families once created meals that were quick, affordable, and comforting, qualities that still matter today. In many mid-century kitchens, the clock often decided what ended up on the dinner table. Families needed meals that were fast, inexpensive, and made from ingredients already sitting in the pantry. One supper that quietly filled that role in countless homes was the simple but satisfying egg and creamed corn skillet. This dish appeared in many vintage meal plans because it required only a handful of everyday ingredients. A small skillet was placed over medium heat, and a bit of butter was melted until it began to bubble gently. Into the pan went a can of creamed corn, its thick and slightly sweet texture forming the base of the meal. The corn warmed slowly while being stirred, filling the kitchen with a comforting aroma. Next came the eggs. 2 or 3 eggs were cracked directly into the skillet and stirred lightly into the warm corn. As the mixture cooked, the eggs thickened the corn, turning it into a soft, creamy scramble. A pinch of salt and black pepper was usually all the seasoning it needed. Some households added a small sprinkle of shredded cheese or a dash of paprika for extra flavor, but the basic version remained wonderfully simple. The entire dish took less than 10 minutes to prepare. Once finished, it was often served straight from the skillet alongside toasted bread or buttered biscuits. The creamy corn and fluffy eggs created a surprisingly hearty supper that felt warm and comforting after a long day. Meals like this were common in an era when wasting food was unthinkable and simplicity was valued in the kitchen. Though rarely seen on modern dinner tables, this quick skillet supper reminds us that some of the most practical meals from the past were also the most satisfying. In the kitchens of the 1940s and 1950s, supper often came together with whatever ingredients were already sitting on the pantry shelf. One quick meal that quietly appeared in many homes was the Hamburger gravy skillet, a simple dish that could feed a family in minutes while stretching a small amount of meat. The process usually started with a skillet placed over medium heat. A small portion of ground beef was added and broken apart with a spoon as it cooked. As the meat browned, its rich aroma filled the kitchen, signaling that dinner was already halfway finished. A pinch of salt and black pepper was often enough seasoning, though some cooks added a bit of onion powder for extra flavor. Once the beef was fully browned, a spoonful of flour was sprinkled directly into the pan. The flour absorbed the flavorful drippings and formed the base of a thick gravy. Milk was slowly poured in while the mixture was stirred, transforming the browned meat into a creamy, savory sauce. Within minutes, the gravy thickened and coated every piece of beef. While the skillet simmered, slices of bread were toasted or leftover biscuits were warmed. The rich hamburger gravy was then spooned generously over the bread, creating a filling supper that required very little time or effort. For families trying to make the most of their groceries, meals like this were incredibly practical. A single pound of ground beef could easily feed several people when turned into a hearty gravy. It was simple, inexpensive, and comforting after a long day. Today, dishes like hamburger gravy skillet are rarely seen outside of old cookbooks. But they remain a reminder of a time when quick suppers relied on creativity, thrift, and the ability to turn a few basic ingredients into something truly satisfying. During the 1950s and 1960s, many American kitchens relied on quick skillet meals that could be prepared without complicated steps. One such supper that quietly appeared in countless homes was the hot dog and baked bean skillet. It was simple, inexpensive, and could be ready on the table in about 10 minutes. The meal usually began with a small skillet warming on the stove. A few hot dogs were sliced into small rounds and placed into the pan. As they cooked, the edges started to brown slightly, giving them a deeper flavor. The gentle sizzling sound was often the signal that supper was already underway. Next, a can of baked beans was poured directly into the skillet with the hot dogs. The thick, sweet sauce from the beans mixed with the brown pieces of hot dog, creating a hearty and savory combination. The mixture only needed a few minutes to heat through while being stirred occasionally. Many families kept the dish very simple, seasoning it only with a little black pepper. Others added a small spoonful of mustard or a dash of brown sugar to deepen the flavor. Some households even stirred in chopped onions if they happened to have them on hand. While the skillet simmered, slices of bread were toasted or buttered to serve alongside the beans. The final meal was warm, filling, and surprisingly satisfying for something that required almost no preparation. Suppers like this became popular because they stretched inexpensive ingredients into a complete meal. In a time when budgets mattered and convenience foods were just beginning to appear, quick skillet dinners like the hot dog and baked beans skillet made weeknight cooking easy. Today, this humble supper has mostly disappeared from modern dinner tables. Yet it remains a small reminder of how simple ingredients once came together to feed families quickly and affordably. In many mid-century American homes, potatoes were one of the most dependable ingredients in the kitchen. They were cheap, filling, and incredibly versatile. One quick supper that appeared in many vintage meal plans was the simple cheesy potato skillet, a dish that could transform a few leftover potatoes into a warm and satisfying dinner in just minutes. The meal often began with leftover boiled or baked potatoes from the night before. Instead of letting them go to waste, home cooks sliced them into small rounds or cubes. A skillet was placed on the stove, and a small amount of butter was melted until it began to sizzle softly. The sliced potatoes were added to the pan and spread into an even layer. As they cooked, the edges slowly turned golden and slightly crisp. The smell of butter and browning potatoes quickly filled the kitchen, creating a comforting reminder of home cooking. A pinch of salt and black pepper was usually all the seasoning needed. Once the potatoes were heated through and lightly browned, a handful of shredded cheese was sprinkled across the top. The heat from the skillet melted the cheese into a creamy layer that coated the potatoes. Some households used cheddar, while others simply added whatever cheese happened to be in the refrigerator. The entire dish took only a few minutes to prepare. When finished, the cheesy potatoes were scooped onto plates and often served with a slice of buttered bread or a simple side of canned vegetables. This quick supper became popular because it made perfect use of leftovers. Nothing in the kitchen was wasted, and a small amount of food could easily feed several people. Although modern kitchens rarely rely on meals like this today, the cheesy potato skillet remains a perfect example of how earlier generations created comforting dinners from the simplest ingredients they had on hand. In many American kitchens of the 1950s and 1960s, canned soup quietly became one of the most useful shortcuts a cook could keep in the pantry. It helped turn simple ingredients into quick meals, especially on evenings when time was short. One supper that appeared in many vintage meal plans was the comforting creamy chicken and rice skillet. The dish usually began with a small skillet warming on the stove. A cup of leftover cooked rice was often the starting point, something many households already had from a previous meal. If rice wasn't left over, instant rice could be prepared quickly while the rest of the dish came together. Next, small pieces of cooked chicken were added to the skillet. Many families used leftover roasted chicken, while others relied on canned chicken because it was inexpensive and convenient. The chicken warmed gently in the pan, filling the kitchen with a savory aroma. Then came the ingredient that made the meal so quick. A can of condensed cream soup was poured into the skillet, most commonly cream of chicken or cream of mushroom. A small splash of milk was stirred in to loosen the sauce, turning it into a smooth, creamy mixture. The rice was folded into the skillet, and everything was stirred together until the grains were coated in the thick, comforting sauce. Within a few minutes, the dish became a warm, creamy supper that looked far more complicated than it really was. A sprinkle of black pepper or a handful of frozen peas was sometimes added for extra flavor. In less than 10 minutes, the entire meal was ready to serve. For busy families, this type of supper made weeknight cooking simple. It stretched small amounts of chicken and rice into a filling dinner without requiring much effort. Today, meals like this are often forgotten, but they remain a reminder of how earlier generations relied on simple pantry staples to create quick and comforting suppers. In the kitchens of mid-century America, casseroles were a cornerstone of quick and inexpensive family dinners. One particularly popular but now largely forgotten supper was the sloppy Joe bake, a dish that transformed a can of ground beef and a few pantry staples into a warm, hearty meal in about 10 minutes. The recipe often began with a small skillet heating on the stove. Ground beef, usually a half pound or so, was added and broken apart as it cooked. Its rich, meaty aroma quickly filled the kitchen, a signal that supper was underway. Once browned, the beef was drained slightly to remove excess fat. Next, a can of tomato soup or tomato sauce was stirred in, creating a thick, savory base. A spoonful of mustard or a dash of Worcestershire sauce was sometimes added for extra depth, though the basic version remained simple. The sauce clung to the meat, forming a rich and flavorful mixture. While the beef simmered, slices of bread or buttered biscuits were prepared. The cooked mixture was spooned generously over the bread, then topped with shredded cheese if available. A few minutes under a broiler or in a warm oven melted the cheese and created a golden, bubbly topping. This quick bake became popular in many households because it turned a small amount of ground beef into a filling dinner that could feed several people. Busy parents appreciated the minimal prep time, and children loved the comforting flavors. Dishes like the sloppy Joe bake highlight the creativity of mid-century home cooks. They relied on pantry staples, simple techniques, and a few clever shortcuts to make meals that were both quick and satisfying. Though it has largely disappeared from modern dinner tables, the sloppy Joe bake remains a nostalgic reminder of a time when inexpensive, hearty, and comforting suppers were a daily reality. Its simplicity and practicality make it a forgotten gem worth revisiting in any vintage-inspired kitchen. In the post-war era, convenience was king in many American kitchens, yet simplicity and thrift still ruled family meals. One classic supper that often appeared in vintage cookbooks was the gnocchi or dumpling soup skillet, a humble but filling dish that could be prepared in under 10 minutes. This meal relied on a few pantry staples but delivered warmth and comfort for the entire family. The dish typically began with a small skillet or saucepan heated on medium. A bit of butter or margarine was melted, and a can of condensed broth, chicken or vegetable, was poured in. The broth formed the base of the meal, creating a savory, flavorful foundation. Next came the gnocchi or small dumplings, often from a can or pre-made batch, which were stirred directly into the simmering broth. The heat from the pan quickly softened the dumplings, allowing them to plump up and absorb the rich flavors around them. Some households added a handful of frozen vegetables, like peas or carrots, to make the meal more substantial. While simmering, a pinch of salt and pepper was often all the seasoning needed, though a dash of paprika or a sprinkle of cheese could be added for extra taste. The mixture required only a few minutes to cook through, making it a perfect option for busy weeknights. Once ready, the dumplings were tender, the broth flavorful, and the vegetables just cooked through, a simple yet satisfying supper. It could be served straight from the skillet, often with buttered toast or crackers on the side. This dish reflected a time when American households valued practicality and resourcefulness. A small number of ingredients could feed an entire family, while still feeling hearty and comforting. Although modern kitchens rarely feature canned dumpling or gnocchi soups, this quick skillet meal is a window into the past, showing how simple ingredients and careful timing could create a filling, cozy dinner in less than 10 minutes. It's a forgotten piece of mid-century culinary history, waiting to be rediscovered. In the 1950s and 1960s, one of the most beloved quick suppers in American kitchens was the macaroni and cheese skillet, though not the boxed version we know today. This was a simple, comforting dish that could be prepared in about 10 minutes using pantry staples and a little creativity. It was inexpensive, filling, and a favorite for families on busy weeknights. The preparation usually began by cooking small elbow macaroni in a saucepan of boiling water until just tender. Meanwhile, a small skillet was heated over medium flame with a knob of butter. Once melted, a bit of flour was whisked in to create a roux, which was then slowly combined with milk to form a smooth, creamy sauce. Shredded cheese, often cheddar or a mix of whatever was available, was stirred into the sauce until it melted completely, forming a rich, gooey mixture. A pinch of salt and black pepper was added to enhance the flavor. Some households also added a dash of mustard or Worcestershire sauce to give it a slight tang, a classic trick from mid-century cookbooks. Once the macaroni was drained, it was folded directly into the cheese sauce. The mixture was stirred until every piece of pasta was coated, creating a warm, creamy, and comforting skillet meal. If desired, the top could be sprinkled with additional cheese or breadcrumbs and briefly broiled to achieve a lightly golden crust. This quick macaroni and cheese was more than just a child-friendly dish. It was a staple for families trying to stretch ingredients while still providing a hearty supper. It was filling, inexpensive, and satisfying, all qualities that made it an essential part of mid-century home cooking. Though it has largely been replaced by modern convenience foods, this simple skillet supper remains a nostalgic reminder of a time when quick, affordable, and comforting meals were crafted with skill and care. It's a perfect example of how simplicity can create lasting satisfaction in the kitchen. In mid-century America, one of the most comforting and budget-friendly suppers was the eggplant or vegetable casserole skillet, a dish that transformed simple vegetables into a warm, hearty meal in less than 10 minutes. Popular in households looking to stretch their groceries, this quick supper combined pantry staples with fresh or canned vegetables for a flavorful, filling dinner. The preparation began with a small skillet heated over medium flame, where a spoonful of butter or margarine was melted. Sliced eggplant, zucchini, or even leftover roasted vegetables were added to the pan. The vegetables were sautéed briefly, just enough to soften them and release their natural flavors. Next, a can of condensed tomato soup or cream of mushroom soup was stirred in, creating a thick, savory base for the dish. The sauce coated the vegetables evenly, melding flavors together. A pinch of salt, black pepper, and sometimes a dash of dried herbs like thyme or oregano enhanced the taste without adding extra effort. While the skillet simmered, a handful of breadcrumbs or shredded cheese could be sprinkled on top for a golden, slightly crispy finish. The combination of the creamy sauce, tender vegetables, and optional topping created a comforting, satisfying supper that could easily feed a family. What made this dish particularly beloved was its adaptability. Cooks could use whatever vegetables were available, fresh, canned, or even frozen, making it a practical solution for weeknight meals. It was inexpensive, nutritious, and came together quickly, perfect for busy households. Although rarely seen on modern dinner tables, the eggplant or vegetable casserole skillet remains a testament to the ingenuity of mid-century home cooks. It shows how a handful of simple ingredients could be transformed into a warm, hearty meal in mere minutes, proving that comfort and practicality have always been at the heart of great American cooking. This quick vegetable supper is a forgotten gem, reminding us that some of the most satisfying meals are the simplest. And there you have it, a journey through 10 forgotten Betty Crocker suppers that once filled American kitchens with warmth, flavor, and practicality. Each of these quick, affordable meals tells a story of resourcefulness, creativity, and family traditions that have slowly faded from modern tables. While today's dinners may be faster or more elaborate, these vintage recipes remind us of a time when simplicity and care went hand in hand. If you've enjoyed this trip back into culinary history, don't forget to subscribe and join our community as we continue uncovering America's lost recipes, one forgotten dish at a time.